All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to our first Red Barn event of this season, 2023-24. And we have a great speaker with us today. And so I'm really excited about what we're gonna hear about tonight. My name is Joshua. I'm the community programs educator here at the Wenatchee River Institute. And we also have Jeremy here helping us out on our technology so that we can stream this for folks at home, and also this can be viewed later. And we have our great volunteer Lissy over here with her two pups serving you drinks and raffle tickets. And I'll talk about those in a minute. Wenatchee River Institute, if you're not familiar with who we are, we work towards a mission of connecting people, communities, and the natural world. And we do this through different programs. We have youth programs, we have community programs. Our youth programs, we work with schools all up and down the Wenatchee Valley and up and down the Columbia Basin as well. And today we had our Alpine Lakes Elementary School here on our campus. We were teaching them about fire ecology and erosion prevention. And so we love having them walk over here for those programs. We also have our community programs, which includes our Red Barn events like tonight. We have many more coming up. And we have workshops that we like to put on. This coming weekend, we have a track and sign workshop, and there's one spot left if anyone's interested. Awesome workshop with Dave Moskowitz. We also have the bilingual salmon tour on September 23rd. So if you're interested in viewing some of the salmon that are running right now, we're going to take people around to different spots and talk about our wonderful salmon. Another aspect of WRI is our effort to connect the indigenous people to their ancestral land here. And we worked with the Wenatchee Advisory Group to come up with a land acknowledgement. And that's something that we commit to reading before any of our programs. This land acknowledgement was created alongside the Chippewa people. We're spreading the message they wish to spread to the public. The land Wenatchee River Institute sits on is the ancestral homelands of the Chippewa, Pasquosa, or Wenatchee people. The Chippewa, meaning people in between, had villages positioned along the Wenatchee River and surrounding areas. Their ancestral homeland extends from the Cascade Ridge throughout what is now known as the Wenatchee and Okanagan Valleys. The culture and economy of the Chippewa people centers on taking care of the land. They fish, hunt, gather roots and berries, basket-making materials, and medicines. The Chippewa are named within the Yakima Treaty of 1855. Language to establish the Wenatchee Reservation was never followed through, even with the needed surveying completed. Many Chippewa now live on the Colville Reservation, 150 miles northeast of Leavenworth. They were forced off their land here, and the U.S. government moved them to this reservation. The Chippewa people are still alive today. They continue to practice their culture, harvest their traditional foods and medicines, and hold their ceremonies passed down from their ancestors. Most people won't see or notice them, but they continue to be on the land they are connected to. Their traditional language is Inhamchin, an interior Salish dialect. And I'd like to welcome you all by saying hello in their language, Tilhusht. Tilhusht. We offer this land acknowledgement as the first step to amplifying Indigenous voices and recognizing the harm done to them as a people. We stand as an ally to recognize their connection to the land and their rights to practice their culture on these sacred lands. We encourage all to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the place you now call home. The Wenatchee River Institute is committed to sharing this land acknowledgement and following up with other actions to educate and be respectful. And I was supposed to move it to this slide so we can see where the traditional lands are in the Colville Reservation. And the Greater Leavenworth Museum has a wonderful exhibit that they just opened, focusing on the Chippewa history, but also currently who they are as people. And so I encourage you all to look at that and go check that out. All right. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. It's because our sponsors and donors that we can reach so many people in the Wenatchee Valley in such diverse ways. So I'd like to thank Ryan House, Icicle Brewing, South Restaurants, North Central Washington Audubon Society, Munchen House, Sleeping Lady Mountain Resorts, Gustav's, Obertal Inn, Chocolat, Barron House, Cove Resort at Fish Lake, Tierra Learning Center, Riverfront Rock Gym, and Rimmer and Reuter Construction. All right. As I mentioned earlier, this presentation is being streamed over Zoom. So I just ask that any questions or comments just be held to the end so that all that can happen at the same time. And folks on Zoom can also ask their questions. So now to introduce our speaker. Mitsu Iwasaki is the Northwest Director at Trust for Public Land, where he leads their work creating and preserving green spaces so that more people can connect to the joys and benefits of the outdoors. Mitsu leads projects across the region to create sustainable working forests that increase recreation opportunities and boost rural economies. So let's welcome Mitsu up here. Thank you.
There it is. Hi. Great to see you all tonight. Thank you for coming. Yeah, my name is Mitsu Iwasaki. I am the Northwest Director for the Trust for Public Land. I'm only about 1 year with the Trust for Public Land. Before the Trust, I was with the American Alpine Club, and before that with Northwest Outward Bound School. I grew up in Seattle, 35 years now, I think maybe approaching 40 years of climbing, hiking, skiing across the mountains. And I'd say that while my primary activity is human-powered, I also need to recognize that I often get there by snowmobiles, ORVs, sometimes helicopters. So I'm both a human-powered recreationalist, and I'm also motorized. And I'd say that you know, a good portion of my formative years adventuring happened here in the North Cascades and around here in kind of like Leavenworth area and all the way down into the Southern Sierras. And I was doing that like here, right, before the permits started coming into place, before rush hour was a thing in Leavenworth, before you needed to get to Stevens Pass at 8 a.m. so you can find parking. Like things have changed. I've been gone for a decade. I came back and it's like, holy smokes, I can't get to the ski hill anymore. I think it's good that there's more people enjoying and getting outside. And I think it's also creating some challenges for all of us as well. I, for one, am choosing to go further out and make space for others. And that's how I'm dealing with it, because I've got the skills. I've spent, I don't know how many days in the enchantments, figured it's time to give somebody else a chance, and I'm gonna go further out. And gives me more adventure as well. With all that said, I would say that it was a sense of restlessness or maybe a sense of urgency having seen these changes, right? And having seen climate change take its impact. And that restlessness, I think really led to my transition from advocating for recreation to advocating for spaces and protection. And so I transitioned from leading the American Alpine Club, you know, supporting climbers and skiers to creating spaces, protecting lands, creating infrastructure. And I'm sharing this kind of background because I'm assuming that all of you create your stories and your narratives and your identities to the space that we're occupying, right? We live here because it's beautiful. We live here because we get to be outside and do these things. And that's really important to me. And my guess, just guessing assumptions, that it's really important to all of you as well. Also for transparency, I serve on the Icicle Fund board, Christine over there. Thank you for your service. I also serve on the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Coalition. So that's the organization that advocates for funding for wildlife and recreation spaces. I also serve on the Mountain to Sound Greenway Board, and that's the organization that advocates for that greenway connecting Seattle all the way out to Ellensburg. And separately, Conservation Colorado. So you can see that I care about conservation as well as the Yosemite Conservancy because I care about climbing. Oh, hang on. I don't know how to drive this very well. So tonight we're going to talk about the Upper Wenatchee Lands Plan. Before we do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about TPL. With that said, the Lands Plan was created in 2015, 2016. It was a community-led process, and that's really important. That's what TPL does really well. I would say that while our work is to protect lands and create access, we're actually a community organizing, or that's a lot of organizations. We're really a community organizing organization, right? We bring communities together, be informed by communities, be led by communities to understand how they see the lands or access to places will most benefit them. I also want to share that we're going to keep it very high level. There's a lot of details around the Upper Wenatchee Community Lands Plan. We are also moving into implementation phase, and there are many partners, right? U.S. Forest Service, the county, TPL, land trusts, and I don't know all the details around that. So it's easy for me to misspeak, and it's easy for me to give Anne, our project manager here, anxiety about what I'm saying. So I'm going to keep it very high level. And then later on, when we get into the question and answer session, we can dig a little bit deeper and Anne can perhaps answer some of those questions. Also know that we cannot speak for the county. We cannot speak for the Forest Service. We cannot speak for other partners. So we can share our viewpoints, but know that our role is to facilitate the transaction. How these long-term landowners use the property is up to them. Our preference is to move property to them from private ownership to public benefit unencumbered. So the Trust for Public Land, founded in 1972. So we're celebrating our 50th year this year. My math tells me it's 51 years, but I'm told it's 50 years. I guess we lost a year in COVID or something. And over those 50 years, we've protected over 4 million acres of land, 5,500 projects across the country, and we've activated about $93 billion in funding. So that's billion with a B. And those numbers mean something, but to me, it doesn't really mean a lot, right? What I know is that on a weekly basis for all of us that go outside, or maybe even a daily basis, TPL touches your lives, right? So reflecting on my own life, I commute from Issaquah down to Seattle, and I learned recently that I actually ride through a TPL project, Mercer Slough. I didn't know that. Olympic Sculpture Park, that was a TPL project. I didn't know that. When I go running in Issaquah, Cougar Mountain, TPL project. If I decide to go up a little bit further up the hill to North Bend, there's TPL projects everywhere. So that's true there, and it's actually true here as well. We were also founded on the notion that maybe we can use traditional real estate tools and transactions to protect land. And we were also founded on the notion that lands are for people. So 50 years ago, we were already set on this path that we are about organizing communities and be informed by communities, and then use these tools to get to the community's access and lands that they lead and inform how that they are used. So yeah, 2 buckets of work really. Oh, I don't know why this is not, oh boy. I've lost the cursor. All right, no notes. 2 buckets of work really, right? Land protection, that is taking privately held property and moving it into public benefit, right? Privately held to public benefit. The second bucket of work is access. So we build parks, and the notion that everyone should have access to a high quality park. Right now, we are on this thing called the 10-minute walk campaign. We are building a park within a 10-minute walking distance of everyone that lives in America. So that's the goal. We're not going to do it ourselves. We're going to do some thinking doing on this and then teach other organizations and agencies to do it themselves too. I'm not sure how to get back to the cursor. Is that one? Thank you. Our mission statement is a little long, right? Create parks and protect lands for people, ensuring healthy, livable communities for generations to come. So I try to just remember our tagline, connecting everyone to the outdoors. A lot easier. In Washington State, we've been here 46 years, 145,000 acres of lands protected across 360 projects. And that's Washington and Oregon because I run both states, but you can see the number of projects that have happened in those areas. One of the most interesting projects that we're working on today, aside from the Upper Wenatchee Community Lands Plan, is Springwood Ranch. How many of folks here are old enough to have gone to a Black Angus restaurant? I know you're embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to admit it too. Stuart Anderson owned the owner of the restaurant chain owned a ranch just outside of Cle Elum called Springwood Ranch. It's 3,600 acres. We just purchased it in March for the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. So that's about it's about water really and preserving lifestyle. We will be working on that through the end of the year, at which point we will convey it, hopefully, to the county, to the reclamation district, Fish and Wildlife, and the Yakima Nation will have access to that land again. My understanding is that they have not had access to Springwood Ranch in multiple generations. We're working on 5 Tacoma schoolyards. I think I'll show some pictures in a little bit. We've got 3 projects in the Mountain to Sound Greenway, a number of projects in the Hood Canal and the Olympic Peninsula currently, and of course, the Upper Wenatchee Community Lands Plan. So this is a picture of a park that we did in Wenatchee. It's called Economies Metal, reopened in 2020. It's in a largely Hispanic neighborhood, and it was community-led project, right? Everything we do is led by the community. It connected 4,000 residences within that 10-minute walk space, and 500 residences from the neighborhood engaged to inform this park. And what they said was it was important to have family gathering spaces, space for cultural festivals, and space for community events. So when you look at this park, you can see the expression of people's backgrounds, right? So the fence here was modeled after a fence from a park in Mexico. The kiosk in the middle is what they wanted to create space for gathering. So this is a very Hispanic neighborhood. Through this, they also created a 501c3 called Padrinos de Parque de Padrinos, who have gone on to build political power within the city as well. So we are a community organizing organization. 10-minute walk campaign. This is a picture from a park or a school in New York City. We've done about 300 schools in New York City where we take hardscape schoolyards, turn it into green schoolyards, and then negotiate access for the public when kids are not in school. So then that is a really efficient way for us to get to a 10-minute walk, right? There's schools everywhere. And if we can negotiate access, then we have a way to get to that 10-minute walk. I know that my schoolyard looked worse than that one. Remember a tetherball court? Remember those? Like the pole was slightly bent. There's a tether. There's no ball on my tetherball court. And so reimagining those into green schoolyards, I think is really amazing. You remember those? Yeah. The other interesting thing about our schoolyards, they're collaborative in design. So students design it, teachers design it. We put some parameters in there, but that first design process, you get everything from water slides to like all kinds of things. And then as students really think through this, they come to a conclusion that something like this would be pretty awesome. All right, Upper Wenatchee Community Lands Plan, created 2015-ish, 2016-ish. As probably most of you already know, this is about 850,000 acres up here in the Upper Wenatchee. It's spectacular, it's beautiful, it's ecologically diverse, and economically, it's really essential for all of us. Like I said earlier, it's probably why you live here, and it's probably why I'm going to live here someday in the future, hopefully. The creation of the plan was a combined effort of the community, Chelan County, CDLT, Chelan Douglas Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy, and the Trust Public Land. Right. So in creating this plan, we brought people together. I think there were 3, is that right? 3 community meetings plus several other mail-in questionnaires to try to understand the value that these lands brought to the community and how the community saw its use into the future. Through that process, we started to develop some short-term goals, long-term goals, and including asking this question: how do we bring public and private partners and community members together to generate funding, political will, and funding and political will to make this thing happen. So TPL is a very data-informed organization, right? We don't do anything without lots of data. And from that initial starting point, we went out and set out to map all the attributes, or many of the attributes. And those included wildlife corridors, habitat, water resources, recreation, both human-powered, non-human powered, motorized, wildfire, working lands, etc. And almost a decade since the start of this community lands plan now, we are moving into the implementation process. And with that said, there's a lot of unknowns out there still in the future. And part of this conversation today is to engage more people and to informing and leading this process. So whether you like it or not, we want you to be engaged in understanding how to use this 35,000 acres that we have an option on. Also wanted to thank Peter Dykstra and Ann Wells, our senior project manager on this project, who have brought us to this point and will take us beyond. The county as well, the commissioners and Mike Caputa, our partners at the U.S. Forest Service, and Icicle Fund, who has helped to support our ongoing expenses, as well as CDLT, who are really close land trust partner. So through this process, we already know that physical characteristics and uses are complex, right? And the ownership here has been really complex. It's got private ownership, it's got public ownership, there's working landscapes, there's recreation landscapes. We've learned that the lower elevations along rivers and lakes are largely in private ownership. I don't know that we needed to map this to figure this out. We know that for sure now. And we know that these areas are substantially subdivided and built out. Large portions of the land are checkerboarded, and they are publicly held and privately held. And that creates problems, creates a lot of challenges. I see a lot of nodding. We can talk about that a little bit more. And those are held by, the U.S. Forest Service, DNR, state parks, and currently Chinook Forest Partners. Chinook Forest Partners, we have an option. We'll talk about that a little bit more, what an option is, on about 35,000 acres, or about 4% of the lands that we're talking about. Through community meetings and outreach campaigns, we came to a few conclusions, or the group that was creating the plan came to some conclusions. Local leaders wanted to take a proactive approach in guiding the future of the lands here. And then developing a vision for future ownership and management was going to be necessary to ensure, the forest health and recreational health of these lands. We did a lot of mapping, and I'm going to apologize because I put the wrong map in here. This is an old map created by someone else. We have an updated map we can share at some point, but we mapped recreation, right? Motorized, non-motorized. We learned that there was a lot of concerns, right? Private lands controlling access, trail connectivity, space for everyone, motorized, non-motorized, hunt, camp, all of those things. And at least back in 2015, I think it's substantially more now. Lodging and restaurants, food and lodging, restaurants and lodging, I don't know how to say that. Here in kind of the Leavenworth area, accounted for about 10% of the economy. I'm guessing it's a lot more today. So there was a quote in the lands plan that I read. It said, tourism it's big business, like it or not. It's here. We also mapped wildlife. This wildlife was generated in 2015. There's been some updates to this thing. Mostly, is it mule deers that were added?
So, WDFW had done mule deer tolerate to show a lot of other land is critical for their
operation. And then most of it has now become red.
Yeah.
A larger portion.
Yeah.
Yeah. We heard from the community that they had strong concerns about lands held by timber. Community had strong concerns around wildlife habitat and migration corridors, and particularly those related to development that was happening or that is happening, and then climate change impact, both on summer forage, winter range, breeding areas. We heard a lot of concern around water, quality of water for fish and wildlife, as well as increasing flood risk and wildfire, controlling of wildfire, as well as the cost of fighting and mitigating wildfires. And as you all know, wildfires and checkerboard ownership do not work well together, right? Forest Service, are they going to mitigate fire on half the lands? Doesn't work real well. Who are they, the firefighting, who and what structures do they try to save? It's not the forest anymore, it becomes those developed lands. So these things have a cascading effect and it's not working. We also looked at working lands, timber, sustainable forestry, and then some concerns around disappearing woods product industry here. And this all, came into this aggregated map of our priorities or the community's priorities. And five high priority points: preserve, restore healthy forest, wildlife stewardship, protect and restore water resources, protect wildlife habitat, retain and or expand recreation opportunities, maintain and or increase working lands. So all of the red in here are our priority areas, informed by all of you, the community. At the time that plan was produced, Weyerhaeuser owned nearly 38,000 acres of those lands. This ownership, as you all know, has changed. I think it was Longview Timber that owned this first, and that was acquired by Weyerhaeuser. And then I think they had an auction in 2009, 2012, and then all of it moved to Hampton Global. And then that moved to Chelan Resources LLC, who is actually wholly owned by Chinook Forest Partners. We, TPL, has had a long relationship with Chinook Forest Partners, and we're able to get into an option agreement for the entirety of the checkerboard, 35,000 acres. What that means is we are, they can't sell this land to anyone else besides TPL. One of the things to know about the Trust for Public Land is that we also do not hold on to land. We facilitate that transaction. So we purchase the land and then we convey it to another organization. That could be the Forest Service, that could be a land trust, that could be DNR, but it is not TPL. We do not hang on to it. We purchase and then we convey it most of the time unencumbered to the eventual long-term landholder. While we have this 35,000 acres under option, we have to perform to maintain those options, right? So by 2026, we have to execute on phase one. 2026, yeah, that's right. If we don't execute on phase one, then we lose the ability to execute on the rest of these things. 2025, okay, so we have one less year than I thought. To do this, there's really three things we need, right? We need a willing seller. We need a long-term partner to hold on to the lands, and we need funding. In this case, we already have the willing seller. We have an option with a willing seller, Chinook. And Chinook does not actually want to see these lands go back into the cycle of selling and ownership and timber. They want to work with us towards conservation outcomes. So we have this, we have this option. We have to now find the funding to purchase all of these lands. And then we need to find the right partners to convey these lands. So phase one, last year, the U.S. Forest Service, through their Land and Water Conservation Fund, announced that we ranked number 5 in the national priority for the U.S. Forest Service's Land and Water Conservation Fund to do phase one. So we have $7 million coming to purchase some component of phase one. We don't know how much of it that will go. We still need to do appraisals and such. But so we have the funding to do phase one. Yes.
We expect to hear that we'll get the funding to do phase one. We're right number 5, but their budget isn't announced yet.
True. Yes.
We had good pizza and beer at Blue Brewing, and so something's fast didn't get discussed.
Yeah, I've already counted it. I've already recognized it. Yes, $7 million. Okay. Yeah. And so, yeah, likely sometime in 2025, we hope to close some sections of phase one. I think maybe we should transition to questions and answers. I'm sure there's some questions about the activities out there.
Can I add some?
Of course, yes, please. Come on up.
Can I talk from here? Do I need to talk from there?
Ideally from here.
Okay, so, and thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate this. Some other things to share before we do Q&A is just to say, we have, not all these lands will go into public ownership. Some will may go to private. And we have told people that if you know people that have interest in some of these lands, let us know. We're collecting names. We probably won't be doing anything with that till 2025, but that was something that was part of the community plan of, that some land is probably, maybe needed for economic development or other uses. So just know that if that's there. The other thing that's happening, and Mitsu, we've applied for phase 2 funding and we don't have it yet.
Yes. I didn't hear that part. I certainly will not, because we have funding.
Okay, that's it. Go ahead.
Do you want to stay up here?
Well, so, ask some questions. Do you want to ask some questions? You want me to?
You want to ask some questions?
Okay. There's no perfect answer, but we had a wonderful opportunity to do some community conversations in early August when most people should be on vacation. And if you were out of town in early August, good for you, you did the right thing. But so now you get the special opportunity to give us some feedback of, how do you enjoy these lands? Who do you think would be a logical owner for them? And also, do you think this is, still a good project to do? A lot of people in this room may not have been part of the 2015, 2016 plan. And so, and so it helps to know. Did you have a question?
I've got a stack of maps if folks would like
Yeah.
to have this and look it over.
Yeah. So that was the question. I did have more.
Oh, let's start there. Yes.
So I see phase 1 and phase 2, much of what's around Leavenworth, and I know about the transit, so this is a selfish question. What phase is that?
So that's why we're having, that's why we're having these discussions, because as we were working for the last couple of years, we kind of greased the skid in terms of phase 1 and 2 were logical Forest Service, they have interest for it. But we need to hear from you all about the rest, about what's important to you, what you like to do. So it's not too late. There is, there's some, Forest Service has expressed interest in some of the other lands. Maybe some might be a community forest for the county, all this is to be determined. And this is how you get to help tell us what's important to you.
So how do we do that?
What do you want for phase 3, 4, or 5?
Yeah.
You want it to be from here or from your thinking?
Oh.
You're fine then. Okay, so, first of all, thank Mitsu and Ann for being here and. Your point about how crowded people have become is really true, and I think everybody here knows that, and a lot of people love it. What I think a lot of people don't realize is there's some opportunities here that aren't maybe so obvious. And if I could speak a little bit of the context, that we have great trails up in the Alpine Lights area, but A, they're under snow much of the year, and B, they're really crowded on the weekends. And I'm retired, I can go midweek, right? But if you're a working person, that doesn't work so well. And if they're under snow, that doesn't work so well. One of the very popular trails very close to Leavenworth is called Towers Mountain. And it exists because much of our roads are down in the valley, much of the forest of this land is up in the hills, and there's private land between them. Okay. So you can't get from the public road to the Forest Service land in a lot of places. Right. And a gentleman named Mr. Sauer owned one of those pieces. He built the trail by himself, and he opened it to the public. His son now owns it. It's not clear whether his son's going to keep it public, and unfortunately, it gets overloved. It gets left to death. The neighbors complaining because there's not parking for it, but it shows there is a need for trails around here that are open, not all year, but longer than the Alpine areas that are not down in Wenatchee. And I think everybody gets that need, but I think a lot of people in Leavenworth don't see, and because my wife leads a women's hiking group, I've learned. If you look at the Stromberg piece and the Chumstick piece up there, which are the closest pieces to Leavenworth, there is a lot of trail opportunity there. And the Stromberg piece, there's informal trails between Leavenworth and Plain. I'm not sure that any of them are official trails, but they could easily become official trails. You could have a trail network between Leavenworth and Plain. And given the growing population, given the growing tourism, given what's happened to our trails, given that Tower Mountain may get closed because it's really fun, right? We could use more trails like that. And those two parcels there are both kind of on the way between Leavenworth and Plain, and there's also some access points. You don't have to do the whole thing. You can access it off the Chumstick. Similarly, and I don't know it as well, but the pieces in the Chumstick square rectangle, there are some trails up there that Drew and I have explored around. And again, much of them is private land, or for example, Eagle Creek. There aren't many places where the Forest Service land comes down to Eagle Creek, and you can get up into those areas easily. A couple of places, but nobody knows about it. So all I'm saying is, we have a trail problem, which you alluded to. I think what people sometimes don't think about is that there's a trail problem in that kind of mid-level between the Alpine area and the foothills. And those two areas are very close to Leavenworth, and there's a lot of opportunity. Right. So if you guys can figure out a way to keep those in trails, that'd be fabulous.
So there's, what we're saying, that there's an infrastructure solution, with the help to create trails to potentially replace or alleviate some of that crowding.
Yeah.
Is it Bruce?
Yeah.
We would love to sit down with you with a coffee or a beer and just vision where some of these.
I'm not saying those all, but maybe more talkative folk person to do. But sure, I'm actually the past president of the Land Trust. So
yes,
I've been involved in some of this stuff.
Okay. Yeah, we would love to take any and all ideas like this. And whether, we obviously won't own that land, but we can, when we convey it, we can point these things out and try to encourage the eventual long-term landowner to put those trails in place. Yeah.
And by the way, thanks for all the stuff that you get on that. I mean, I've enjoyed a bunch of it around here, and I think like you, a lot of us don't know, or maybe don't know, oh, TPL is why this Volunteers here, so thanks.
And to add, we have, I have a bazillion maps and I just didn't bring them tonight that show the detail of aerials and all this. And so seriously, if people want to sit down and draw on maps and say, this is important to me, this is important to me, this is where I play. I would really love that because I don't have time to hike these trails.
So how can we get that information to you?
So just email me. My business card is on the table or I'll just say it right now and but it's on the table.
Okay.
So my name is my email is my name, ANN period WELZ as in zoo at Tom Peter Larry TPL.org. And so happy to, and again, if you want information, I have it and let us step. Yeah.
So another question I have is, so you have an auction, I guess I don't understand real estate transactions very well. If you're not able to move forward quickly enough, can you lose that option? In other words, what's the sense of urgency here? Especially for these areas up by Leavenworth that aren't part of phase one or phase two. And then could you also talk a little bit about, so if you sell it to a private owner, how is that any different than me selling my property to someone? Is there something in there that says you are part of a land trust? You must, like what's the deal there? What's to prevent somebody from putting up a fence and saying bye-bye?
All great questions. So on the first, a little bit about, and I apologize for us using the lingo because we say it all the time, but think about an option as you own a property, you give me an option for it and only you can't sell it to anybody else and you give me 5 years to buy it. So for 5 years, I can buy your property under some terms we agree to, but nobody else can. So basically, we use a term and say we've tied it up. They can't sell it to somebody else. It gives us certainty so that when we apply for public funding, that the public funders know if we give you the money, you guys can buy it.
But on those areas that aren't phase one or phase two, what's the end of the option?
Yeah, and that's a very good question too. So our option is a rolling option. We have to perform annually, starting in 2025 and doing some large scale purchases. So that's why we were kind of in the works long before we announced, thinking that we might have this chance. And that's why being lined up for 2025, maybe phase one, 2026 could be phase two. That gives us a couple of years to be thinking, what should happen with the rest? And you are correct. If that train stops, we get kicked out. Option's over. And the thing is, as some people said, well, I'm gonna be sarcastic here. Give us 10 years to talk about this property because we want to figure out what to do in all this. And it's like, no one's going to believe you. The current, who's going to give us, the 7 years we're getting to Chinook? If we can't figure it out in 7 years and we did a community lands plan, no one's going to give us more time. So either we do it now or we say, okay, well, guess we didn't really care. And the landowner can do what they want. So just no, we're doing stuff so that we have this time now. And so this is the right time to care. And then does that answer that question? I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, yeah. Private. So I'm going to go back a little bit. When we talk about private land sales, when I was talking about private land sales, I meant it in the strictest form of the word. TPL would sell 5 acres to somebody, they can do what they want, and they can put up a fence on, or they can put up a gas station. We are not, we're not in the business of holding a conservation easement. If there are situations where somebody wants to say, I'm a private landowner, I want to buy 80 acres and I want to work with CDLT and donate an easement, and we're going to give a gift for stewardship, that's business a person can do. But part of the land plan from 2015, 2016 was the community, not just commissioners, said, we've got a lot of public lands. Maybe some of this lower elevation land, maybe it could be a private economic development use, or maybe something. So we are asking the question, and just know that people have approached us with land that they're interested in buying. And what we have told them is in about 2025, we'll start looking at some of this seriously. Our first goal as a trust for public land is we're looking to do large scale land conservation. We are not in the business of buying and selling land for private, sales. But that is part of the plan, that there may be a very small fraction of private sales. But in those lands, when people say, oh, I want so-and-so, we're gonna look at that to say, is there high private public use for that? Is there a trail through that everyone wants? Is this part of the checkerboard? So not all lands will make sense. It might be some lands near already developed areas would make the most sense that maybe aren't as used by the public as others are. So does that help? I mean, it may not be what you want to hear, but that's okay.
But that's why we want to get partners like the Chelan County Land Trust to get active. Right. I mean,
I would say, my opinion, so that I don't view private land sales as a defeat or a loss. I mean, 35,000 acres is a whole bunch of stuff, land, and a lot of great public goods going to happen. So if there are public uses for all the land and there are buyers for it and there's money for it, then that's wonderful. But and yes, I will say, maybe there are partners that you could pursue. And what we tell folks though is, I will say, Eunice, land trust gets loved to death. Everyone mentions the land trust should own this, the land trust should own this. What you missed at the other public meetings is Mickey, I think, shared it, Eunice. Maybe, why don't you just answer that question? Would people?
well, I will say this, that not all land has that same conservation value. There are some lands that are for development, and there's some land that's really valuable for conservation. So that is part of the equation of how to work to do with this land. And I would say that we're all still exploring what this could be, right? Like we could possibly be a takeout for some of it. We're not out of the, we're not considering it. So this is a long process. It started in 2015 and we're still in the table. So. Does that characterize it? This is my new director. It's really running the operation.
Yeah, I think that now that the Forest Service has put in applications for phase 1 and phase 2, we are internally at the land trust looking at the other parcels to see what has the highest conservation value. I'm here to listen to what you have to say about where are there recreation priorities, and then looking at, who could be the owners of those areas to provide conservation and recreation. It could be the land trust. We actually have fairly few funding opportunities for these kinds of upland forested parcels unless it's a fundraising campaign. There's a lot more funding opportunities for riparian lands. So those are all the things we have to consider. I have a lot of experience with the Forest Service. And so, same with TPL, if we can help them acquire it, that could also be another option. So that's kind of what we're all looking at right now.
There's a question over here. Yes.
I used to live on Eagle Creek. And we go up past that box of 19 quite a bit, past the pavement. And it's a fairly steep hillside, pretty much straight Doug firs, north facing. And it's clear cut now. And it's like the entire section, you can see the borders on it with the roads going up in there. Maybe it has recreation value, although it's pretty steep. It's going to take at least 20 or 30 years before it's anything but an eyesore. And in 2015, was it known that that was going to be clear cut? It sure changed the value of it. And with climate change, those trees are going to grow back a lot slower than they would have in 2015, certainly in 1980 when I moved here.
And I don't know if we knew that they would sort of cut it back in 2015 or not. What I do know is that until we exercise the option, until we purchase it, the landowner owns the land, and they have to should think about my words a little bit more. But but they're going to operate the land as if they're going to own it forever, right? So,
That's why they own it.
Yeah.
They're a logging company.
yeah, there are some recreational values for clear cuts too, as a backcountry skier. Like I was just up on the super block. It's an amazing thing. Very small value. The three of us.
I mean, that's it.
Yeah,
There might be an awful lot of hidden logs in there.
yes, I bought that one. You see, I'm not from getting one of those. Other questions?
Just a few things from online, just talking about a couple of areas. That are interesting. The Chihuahuas are an amazing mountain range that should be looked at closely for increased access.
The colder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the Navajo Mountain is a great hike, but easy parking right now is kind of near Cold Spring.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then a couple of things we did talk about was just to say, it didn't come up today, but we are in conversations with the Yakima and the Colvilles and we anticipate letters of support from both of them for phase 2. And they have expressed appreciation that these lands will now be available to the tribes if they were in the Forest Service ownership hands. And also this work will allow landscape scale restoration of the watershed and, forest health resilience. So, the other part, in case it comes up, is folks may know that Chinook is not allowing public access on their lands. I am not their police, so I will not be monitoring if you go out there or not. But the prior owner, Warehouser and Longview, they did allow public access, or else later with Warehouser it was through a permit system or a lease. Chinook has a staff of one West Warden to manage their lands here and on the west side. They don't have the staff for a recreational. And some folks have said, well, what about the recreational immunity law and all this? And it's like, their main concern actually is also fire. And they know firsthand, because they had fire on the Bolt fire, they lost 800 acres. That's on the west side. So it's like, folks, if you want the land, buy it, and we're not trying to be jerks, but it's just a high risk proposition for them for public access about people. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting confused. You talk about Chelan and then Chinook. Okay, the relationship between.
Chelan is totally owned by Chinook.
Oh, okay, so this is just one subsidiary. Okay, so when you say Chinook or the land, they're interchangeable.
Yeah, and you're the only one who's paid attention to this.
Yes. Get it right.
Do you have an idea of how far that initial 7 million from the Forest Service will go?
We really don't. I mean, we just, I hate to say it this way, threw some darts out because it didn't make sense for us to do any appraisal work because the only appraisal that's going to matter is the one the Forest Service does with whoever the Forest Service hires for this process. And the appraisal will happen next summer. So we're hopeful, but we really don't know at this time. And once the first appraisal happens, we'll start getting a sense for the value of the rest. So it depends on the timber, it depends on lots of things.
And that will just be an appraisal for phase 1 and phase 2.
Yeah, but it was at least inform us about that. Yeah.
7 million was just for phase 1, potentially, right? It was their first application, so they've asked for more in this second application, right? Or have they not?
So the second application is for 8 million.
Okay, so there's potentially 15 million then.
Potentially, yeah. And the reason we asked for 8 is that, we rank well with 7. Let's see if we can ask for more. So I mean, this.
I have a question. So you briefly just a second ago mentioned in the Forest Service ownership, there would be the potential for landscape scale forest restoration. I also hear very clearly that there's sort of no strings attached as these lands would get transferred. But do we have any real influence or assurances, or is there a plan, a management plan, or you know, how do we get the Forest Service to actually manage these in a responsible way versus just like grant a bunch of timber permits, which they do on Forest Service lands as well.
So, I mean, a couple questions. So good question. TPL doesn't add any strings.
Right.
But depending on the funding source may or may not add strings. Like if a state grant might add strings. I would say the Land and Water Conservation Fund just really asks them to manage their lands as they manage lands. So you've asked a really good question about, well, what about the future? And what they will say is until we own the lands, we don't have the resources to do planning. But anticipate that we would probably manage the land similar to the ones around it in terms of the use. And know that there will be their public process. And yes, it's a long process where they ask stuff. So I guess what I want to say in some ways, we're asking you help to get this ball rolling. But if you care about what actually happens next 20, 40 years, you're going to have to be in the face and the face of anybody. Yeah. So this is easy. You can say, yeah, help give us land. And I'll say, good. And then yeah, you've got your work to do because there's a lot of various interests. Yeah. And yeah.
Well, is there anyone from the Forest Service here? Because I might have my facts wrong, but I think this summer they just signed their documents to do restoration up in the Chihuahua. I think it took 10 years. Don't quote me on that. And then now they're starting that process of the chumstick. That's my understanding. Did I get this right?
I'd be interested to know more about that.
And they were actually planning for restoration in this area until they recognized with the checkerboard. And because, well, that land was owned by a private owner, they couldn't even just decommission roads on their property. So, you know, they're anxious to, you know, to start doing some of the work that was mentioned. And they've got their biggest problem right now is they have too much money from the Congress to spend on fighting fires. So they're hiring people, they're getting stuff trained, they're doing RFPs, so they can start doing some landscape planning and analysis and start doing some of the things that Jennifer mentioned.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's.
Can you outline in brief the next steps of if, aside from emailing and some of our favorite places of recreation, what do you anticipate for additional public engagement periods and or seeking out funding, and what does it look like? And if we're interested in staying engaged, what would you see that?
So we haven't scheduled the next kind of set of kind of public engagements, but if people want to have a conversation, whether it's coming to a group or it's Rotary or something like that, or you know, speaking to the group about the opportunities or sitting down with maps, let us know informally. In terms of formal stuff, I would say it is important now if you have opinions of what you want to see, because I think the next phase will be something the Forest Service applies for, because I don't see the county or another group ready at this time. So if there are lands you have interest in, what we are doing is we're collecting input and sharing it with our stakeholders about, you know, this is what we're hearing. So know that there will be times when we say, hey, could you come fill a county commissioner meeting if you care about this? You know, there may be times when we say, could you and your groups write a letter to the Forest Service saying this is important to you or not? So right now is kind of a little lull because some stuff just happened. And I wish we actually had more action for you to do because you're here and I could make you feel guilty. But anyway, but that's how we, you know, and also know that, yeah, I wish I had more homework to give you. Christine?
Well, actually already stole my question. Saying that if I plan to be around here for 25 years plus, and want to go to that land where Mitsu would now be skiing, but I would not,
Yeah.
that Karen was referring to. And for me, right now, it's not that interesting, but down the road it would be. And I really want to make sure that these lands are protected and don't remain unattractive to me in one way or another, or inaccessible to me.
Yeah.
What can I do? Is there something I can do right now? Is there something I can do down the road? And how do I know about what I can do down the road? It's a different twist on Ari's question, that do we get on an email list with you, Anne, or?
Yeah, no,
And we sign up right over there?
yeah.
Tell you everything as you learn it. We'll bombard you with opportunities to engage if you'd like to leave a name, email address. Yeah, I'll pass it around.
One of the ways that I'm thinking about this as well is that, you know, to your question as well, it is preferable that majority of this land goes to the Forest Service, and please correct me if I'm wrong on that. So that we get rid of this checkerboard, right?
Yeah.
And if it goes to the Forest Service, we have a voice in how they manage that forest. If it remains in Chinook, where it goes back to warehouse or it goes to somewhere else, private ownership, we don't actually have a voice. And so I hear your question. I have the same concern. We're not going to encumber it unless the funding source does. And then once we get it into public ownership, then let's use our voices to maybe inform and lead that conversation and how it ought to be used or managed. Yeah. But getting rid of the checkerboard, I think, is high priority. Yeah.
I think it's a really good question about what the Forest Service can do with it. And again, if any of you have been up to Mountain Home, which is now a land trust property, the PPL say, and there are trails up there, and typically people go to the right, but if you go to the left, after about half a mile, you come to a fence and a big pile of brush and no trespassing sign. And it used to be warehouse land, and you could have walked there. But they sold it to a private party who doesn't want people to go, and so that trailer is done. And that's what's gonna happen to all this stuff, if you don't do something.
Your question is really complicated. We have a project in Southern Oregon currently. Land under option, takeout partners, there's 2 or 3 potential takeout partners. This was part of a burn, the bootleg fire in 2019. And we are currently in conversation about seed mix. And every takeout partner wants and needs a different seed mix, right? So like, how do you manage for that? And there's really no way for us to manage that. Yeah. Yes.
What avenue would we engage DNR or Forest Service to like take on some of these lands? Like, we're like, hey, we really just rather the Forest Service take on Colter block. Who would we go to? What avenue would we kind of encourage for that?
So are you saying you have a certain,
Like if the community, if like a large group of the community wanted to speak up and say, hey, we just prefer the Forest Service take over Colter, like.
as opposed to that not being anybody or not being the county? I'm not.
Yeah, or maybe any other larger public agency, DNR, county.
Yeah.
But yeah, how would like sort of a grassroots community try to influence the purchase of that?
Because we're the ones who have the option. So there's 2 things here. As you and I'll cut to the chase here. DNR doesn't want, they're looking to trade out of some of their lands. So they're not actively volunteering. And WDFW has said, we hope that these are all conserved. You know, we don't see ourselves as a logical partner because we don't have stuff. So I will just say the people left in the room are the Forest Service, possibly the county. They haven't said no, they haven't said yes. But I think what might be better at this stage is to say, and I would say that would be fine to tell the county directly, we want to see Colter block conserved, whether, you know, whoever it is, just to let them know it's important. Or you can tell me, and we're collecting these things to share with the steering committee. The steering committee is the county, the tribes, the Forest Service, the other land managers, CDLT and others. So but you'll feel free to say something to them directly. On the Coulter block for the Forest Service, it is not the highest priority for them, and the reason is they used to own it. They exchanged out of it, so they would, it's a little awkward for them, so it's not that they're opposed to it, but the county has sort of said, we might want, if we want anything, we might want that because we have a community forest next door. So the Forest Service is stepping back and saying, so I would say Coulter is your,
I just do that as an example.
oh, example, yep.
Anyone that we want,
Yeah.
that, you know, maybe the town of Leavenworth, a group of us, I'm just saying,
Yep.
like, hey, let's like really push for this chumstick block.
If there was more of a formal group, I would be happy to kind of sit down and kind of give you coaching about, you know, here's some maps or here's some things you do. And then I could help you say, send your letter to so-and-so. It could be Kristen Bale, could be the county. Happy to help you on those. What we didn't want to do is inundate them with 300 separate, you know, things. But what you're talking about is organized voice, and that's happy to help give you the tools to do that. Yeah, that would be great.
Maybe take one more question and call it a night? Or no more questions?
And I'll ask another one. I'm looking around the room here. I was at an earlier public meeting around this as well. And I wonder how we connect into this process, the Latino part of our community. It's 30% of the people that live here. And they're part of the future of this community. They're here now, they use the lands. I wonder if you're already reaching out or if that's something we can help with, or any thoughts around that?
We could use some help with that. We have done some reach out, and part of it was like, you know, not the most important thing for us right now. Glad to know, you know, or keep us informed. But I would just say, I think we need some help with that. I need some help with that.
Yeah, it's good to know.
Yeah.
We'll talk.
I think that's it. Thank you so much for coming. Please sign up, please stay informed. Please be ready to engage when the next phase comes along, because we're gonna need your help to have a conversation with the Forest Service, to have a conversation with the county, like your voices really count. And help lead this process. So Anne has an idea of how to convey these lands as well. Okay, thank you.
Okay.